You can choose a life of ease and comfort, or you can choose a life of service and adventure. Which one of those, when you're 90 years old, are you going to be more proud of?
A garage startup into a global empire worth hundreds of billions. And Lauren Sánchez, a former television anchor turned helicopter pilot and entrepreneur with a magnetic presence that lit up every room they entered together from the outside, their story looked perfect. A love that was larger than life and impossible to ignore. They sailed across the Mediterranean on a $500 million super yacht, a floating palace with decks gleaming under the sun, champagne glasses sparkling in the hands of guests and cameras always ready to capture the perfect moment. Newspapers and glossy magazines hailed them as the golden couple of the new age, a power duo who had it all. Money, fame, influence, and what looked like unshakable devotion, but behind, the staged smiles and dazzling red carpet appearances. There were whispers that began as faint as the wind on the ocean, but slowly grew into something much darker. Some insiders claimed Lauren craved the spotlight too much, that she was restless even in the midst of unimaginable luxury. Others pointed out that Bezos, while a genius in business, was often distracted, consumed by projects that reached beyond Earth itself, leaving spaces in his personal life that no amount of wealth could fill. Still, the image of unity endured for the cameras. Bezos holding Lauren's hand as they stepped onto yachts. Lauren gazing at him with practiced warmth as the flashes went off. They were adored, envied, criticized, but always watched, and for a time that seemed to be enough. Yet in every fairy tale there is a shadow waiting to break the illusion. And for Bezos and Sanchez, that shadow would appear not in boardrooms or rocket hangars, but on the deck of a yacht under the Mediterranean. A place meant for privacy, but destined to become the stage of scandal, because in the world of billionaires, privacy is never guaranteed. Walls have cracks, secrets slip through, and one moment of careless intimacy can travel faster than any rocket Bezos had ever launched. The whispers that had once circled quietly around their glittering romance began to take on sharper edges. And by the time the summer sun had fully risen over the Mediterranean, a different story was already unfolding aboard. The super yacht that was supposed to symbolize love and power and untouchable wealth. The decks gleamed with marble. The champagne never stopped flowing. The guest list sparkled with names that ordinary people would only ever read about in magazines. And yet behind the curtain of perfection, something small and almost invisible began to shift. Lauren Sánchez, who had once been hailed as the woman who could stand beside Jeff Bezos without flinching under the weight of his empire, seemed unusually free that afternoon. She laughed more loudly, leaned in more closely, and allowed herself to forget, if only for a moment, that every billionaire carries with him not just wealth, but the burden of being watched. She was seated on the upper deck, surrounded by a handful of trusted guests, people who themselves lived in a bubble of secrecy and indulgence. But among them was a man who did not carry the weight of Jeff's presence, and it was with him that she lingered. Their conversation, innocent at first, turned into something softer, the kind of energy that is impossible to hide even in silence. A hand brushing across a table, a laugh that lingers just a second too long, an exchange of glances that speaks louder than words, and for those who were watching closely, the body language could not be dismissed.
Spelling. I just want to see
Some of the crew saw it too.
I turned in the paper and she looked at me and she goes, "You're not dumb, you just can't spell." Changed my whole life.
All I did was show you a door. You walked through it and you're the one who changed your life.
She got me tested for dyslexia.
And leaned in close, her smile wide, her hand resting just a fraction of a second longer than it should have on the stranger's wrist. And though no vows were broken, no explicit line was crossed, the suggestion was there clear enough to feel like a spark. And in the world of billionaires, a spark is enough to ignite. A fire, whispers started before the yacht even reached port. Someone in the crew texted a friend, someone else made a remark at a bar, and before long the story had traveled like contraband across a chain of insiders whose appetite for scandal was as endless as their wealth. One man, a guest himself, decided to capture the moment on his phone, the angle awkward, the focus imperfect, but the frame undeniable. Lauren smiling, leaning toward a man who was not Jeff Bezos. The photo, like a tiny crack in a fortress of perfection, spread quietly from one private inbox to another, not yet a headline, not yet a tabloid cover, but a secret too tempting to keep. Bezos, at this point, knew nothing of what had been captured. He was elsewhere, immersed in the machinery of empire and the ambitions of spaceflight, unaware that the strongest challenge to his image was not from a rival company or a competitor nation, but from within his own carefully curated love story. And as the photo passed through encrypted chats and hushed conversations, it began to grow in power, each retelling, adding new details, each whisper, sharpening into accusation until what had been a blurry moment risked becoming a global spectacle. The irony was cruel for a man who had built systems of surveillance logistics precision to command global commerce. Jeff Bezos was about to learn that when it comes to love and loyalty, no system, no algorithm, no rocket can save you from the weight of human betrayal. By the time the first photo reached Jeff Bezos, the damage was already done, not because the image itself was explicit, but because in the world he inhabited, perception was as powerful as proof. And when he looked at the blurred shot of Lauren on the yacht, her hair catching the wind, her hand grazing against the stranger's, his mind did not need to fill in details. The implications were clear enough, and suddenly the empire he had built with precision, discipline, and ruthless foresight felt shaken by something as simple as a smile. He could not control those who were closest to him. Said his expression never changed when he first saw the photos, that he continued his meetings, his presentations, his polished conversations about rockets and commerce as if nothing had pierced his armor. But the truth simmered beneath the surface. Bezos had endured competitors, regulators, politicians, and even divorce. But this was different. This was personal, and personal attacks always cut deepest. He called in his most trusted security advisors, men who had once tracked threats to his company, and even governments now tasked with unraveling who had dared to capture this moment and why. Because Bezos knew leaks do not happen by accident. Someone had seen an opportunity. Someone had planned a betrayal, and in his world, betrayal had consequences. Meanwhile, Lauren felt the shift almost instantly once the rumors began to spread. Her phone stopped ringing with the same warmth. Old friends became careful. Some stopped reaching out at all. And wherever she went, whispers followed. Her footsteps? She had been the glamorous partner, the helicopter pilot turned socialite who could hold her own on any red carpet. But now every move was scrutinized, magnified through a lens of suspicion. When she laughed at an event, it was deemed careless. When she appeared quiet, it was deemed guilty. When she wore her ring, it was defiance. When she did not, it was proof that something was broken. She tried silence as her shield, ignoring calls for comment, never granting an interview. But silence, in the age of social media, is rarely protection. It is fuel. Her name trended daily, her face plastered across headlines with captions that asked, not if, but when the marriage would collapse. Tabloids called her restless, ambitious, opportunistic online. Forums tore apart her past relationships, every anecdote reframed as evidence of betrayal, and the weight of judgment grew heavier still. Bezos responded differently in public. His feeds remained untouched by the scandal he posted about climate change, about lunar landers, about leadership, as if to prove he was unbothered. But behind the curtain, his world was contracting. Fewer allies were let inside, fewer conversations allowed to flow freely. The yacht guest list was investigated, the crew members cross-examined, NDAs suddenly reinforced with legal steel. And through it all, Bezos' silence was not emptiness. It was calculation, because he knew better than anyone that the story was not about the photo itself, but about who controlled its meaning. To the tabloids, it was betrayal. To his competitors, it was weakness. To him, it was war. He began to draft plans not of divorce, but of strategy. Those who saw him in those days described a man sharper than ever. A man not broken, but ignited, because humiliation was something he would never allow to define him. Lauren, on the other hand, had entered a storm she could not control, even at private dinners. Friends whispered about her motives, even her attempts to show solidarity by attending events. With Jeff, backfired body language, dissected photos, analyzed experts called onto television to interpret every gesture. The yacht had become a ghost, haunting her every step, a reminder that even the most private moment once captured can destroy everything carefully built. And so the couple who had once been called the golden pair now stood on the edge of something much darker, not yet shattered, but no longer whole. And the world waited to see what Jeff Bezos would do next, because his next move would not just decide his marriage. It would decide the legacy of how the richest man on earth responds when love itself becomes a liability. And so the storm did not end. It evolved. It grew darker, heavier, feeding on every photograph, every whisper, Every carefully crafted leak that seemed to arrive on cue as though someone somewhere was orchestrating not just chaos but collapse. Insiders close to Bezos insisted he never showed fear in boardrooms, never let tremors appear in front of investors. But behind the fortress of privacy, those closest to him said the toll was real. Nights when even his legendary discipline gave way to silence. When he stood at windows overlooking oceans or skylines, staring as though searching for the one miscalculation that had allowed this breach to slip through cracks, he thought he had sealed years ago, for Bezos' control was religion, and religion had been violated. Lauren, meanwhile, spiraled in a different direction, her days filled with the constant hum of speculation, her image distorted into caricature online. Strangers called her manipulative, opportunistic, a woman who built empires not by bricks of labor but by shadows of charm. The diamond ring on her finger, once meant to symbolize love, now became evidence in the court of public opinion that she was playing for power. Every outfit analyzed, every public word framed as performance, not truth. And yet those who actually knew her saw a woman cornered yet unbroken, still walking into rooms where she was unwelcome, still smiling when every camera lens wanted her to cry, still daring to hold Bezos' hand even when the world called. The gesture fake, there was defiance in her silence, and there was strategy too, because if Bezos' weapon was patience, hers was endurance. The story twisted again when new documents surfaced, leaks pointing not only to old relationships but to business connections, threads that tied Lauren to power players in media and entertainment. The kind of names that made the public wonder whether this was simply scandal or whether this was chess with more than two players. Bezos had always believed in enemies. He built companies assuming rivals' hidden shadows, and in this moment he believed the same. Someone was engineering a downfall, and if he could find the architect, he could dismantle the narrative at its core. For weeks, lawyers tracked patterns, traced accounts, followed the breadcrumbs of photographs and texts. But in every step, Bezos found mirrors, smoke shadows designed to confuse him, which only enraged him further, because in his world there was no unsolvable puzzle, only puzzles that had not been solved yet. Meanwhile, the world kept feeding gossip sites, blasted headlines, tabloids created collages of Lauren smiling with men, from her past yacht photos layered against gala photos. Insiders fabricated quotes, and the audience consumed it like spectacle, turning two people's unraveling into daily entertainment. It was Hollywood, it was politics, it was money and scandal and betrayal, and it was addictive to watch. Bezos and Lauren became symbols, not individuals. He was the billionaire cuckolded in public. She was the seductress climbing by charm, their humanity stripped away, leaving only archetypes that could be consumed and mocked and monetized, yet even stripped bare. They kept walking into cameras together, refusing to break on cue. But the truth inside their walls was far messier. Some nights ended in arguments, words sharpened by hurt and pride. Some nights ended in silence, each retreating to separate wings of mansions that felt like prisons, not homes, and yet other nights ended in strange reconciliation, in moments when the storm outside pulled them together, because only they knew the weight, only they understood the ferocity of living as spectacle. Bezos still spoke of space, Lauren still dreamed. Aloud of projects and activism, they both still looked toward futures that seemed impossible to others, because the love that had once been fire was now battered but not extinguished. And no matter how fractured the present, they seemed unwilling to let outsiders dictate their ending. The press waited for a break, waited for Bezos to file papers or Lauren to be photographed without her ring, waited for the official collapse that could validate years of whispers, but weeks turned into months. And though cracks widened, no public confirmation came instead. Bezos deepened his silence, letting the storm exhaust itself, while behind the scenes he built a counteroffensive, and those close to him whispered of dossiers being compiled, of narratives being rewritten, of allies being assembled, because Bezos knew timing was everything, and that patience was sometimes the most brutal form of power. Lauren, too, began to reshape her image, carefully aligning herself with charitable work, public appearances, less focused on glamour, more on purpose, subtly rebranding herself as more than the caricature painted by tabloids. It was not a loud defense, it was a quiet reclaiming of self. And then the twist. Bezos did not crumble. Bezos did not leave instead. He began to appear more frequently at events with Lauren smiling. Not the forced jaw-set smiles of survival, but something warmer. Deliberate, a statement in itself. And though critics called it performance, those who watched closely understood it. was a message not to the world, but to the players who had engineered the storm. The message was simple. You failed, the marriage may be battered, but it is not broken. The narrative may be poisoned, but it will not define me in a world where weakness was currency. Bezos had flipped the table, refusing to give the audience the ending they wanted. And so the story shifted. The headlines softened attention, drifted new scandals replaced theirs as they always do in the endless cycle of public appetite. The storm that had once seemed designed to end them began to fade, not because the truth was cleared, but because time is the greatest eraser. Bezos and Lauren stood still, bruised but standing, their power couple image now recast not as perfection, but as endurance, and in endurance there was a new kind of narrative, not flawless, not untouchable, but unbreakable. And for Bezos, that was victory. Because survival in itself was dominance, for Lauren it was redemption, because every step forward meant she had not been destroyed. Yet beneath the calm there was still calculation. Bezos never forgot. He never forgave those who tried to script his collapse. And though the world moved on, he quietly kept records, quietly built strategies, because power, for him, was not about reaction. It was about memory and leverage. And one day the debts of betrayal would be collected for Lauren. The lesson was harsher. The world would always doubt her, always question her motives, but she learned to carry the doubt. Like armor, turning criticism into fuel, appearing when least expected, smiling when most unwelcome, because for her the only way through was forward. And as years passed, the question lingered: was their marriage broken, or was it battle forged? Was it a facade held together by power, or was it love proven by fire? The answer lay somewhere in between, tangled in money, power, loyalty, betrayal. But what remained undeniable was this: Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez had been tested in public like few others. And while many expected their empire to collapse, it did not. Instead, it transformed, scarred perhaps, but standing a reminder that in a world addicted to scandal, sometimes the most shocking ending is no ending at all. Just survival, just persistence, just the refusal to give the audience the spectacle they demand. Because the truth was, the storm had not destroyed them. It had remade them. And for better or worse, they were still standing, still holding hands, still walking into rooms filled with whispers and cameras, and in that endurance lay their greatest power, the power to outlast the story. As the weeks dragged on, the photos that had once been little more than blurred whispers now sat like sharp glass under every step Jeff and Lauren took in public, and the illusion of perfection that had carried them through galas, film festivals, and yacht parties seemed to be fraying in slow motion. Insiders close to the couple described nights spent apart, long silences in houses large enough to make absence feel like exile, and dinners where conversation was replaced with a choreography of avoidance. Still, Bezos refused to make the move. So many expected, he did not file for divorce. He did not issue statements. Instead, he leaned into what he understood best: control of information, control of narrative, control of power. He summoned lawyers and investigators, not only to trace the leak, but to trace the motives behind it. Because to him, this was not random. This was calculated, and calculation meant there was an enemy. Someone who wanted him diminished, not just as a man, but as a titan in the corporate and political arenas where weakness could be fatal. Lauren, meanwhile, fought a different battle. Her name was now the shorthand for scandal. Tabloids branded her disloyal, social media dissected every dress, every hairstyle, every ring finger. Her independence, once celebrated as confidence, now recast as recklessness. And even when she smiled in public, the smile was labeled as arrogance. When she frowned, it was guilt. Friends said she clung to silence because explanations would only add fire to a blaze already out of control. Yet silence was not protection. It was ammunition, and every day she kept quiet, the gossip grew louder and the story more toxic. Still, she attended events beside Bezos when required, appearing at charity auctions and boardroom celebrations, though the warmth was gone, replaced by a thinly veiled truce. Staged for cameras, the power couple now looked like a power calculation. His jaw set, her gaze searching the chemistry replaced with choreography, and each photograph became a battlefield of interpretation. In private, Bezos was far from passive. Those who knew him well said he was studying the storm, dissecting who benefited from his humiliation, who whispered first, who sold the photos, who repeated the lies because Bezos had never built Amazon or Blue Origin by surrendering control. He had built them by gathering information faster than anyone else, and then using it with ruthless precision, and this scandal would be no different. Some suspected he was already preparing the ground for a quiet but devastating move, a legal maneuver that would expose not only the leak, but the motivations behind it. Others believed he had no intention of leaving Lauren at all, that he was gathering details not to separate, but to dominate the story, to rewrite it in his own terms, to emerge not as a victim, but as a strategist who turned betrayal into advantage. And while speculation circled endlessly, one thing was clear: Jeff Bezos was not paralyzed. He was plotting, and the world waited, holding its breath, because everyone knew when Bezos finally moved, it would not be timid, it would be seismic. Meanwhile, Lauren's days grew darker. Paparazzi stalked her steps. Photographers fought for angles that could be interpreted as evidence of collapse. She avoided interviews, but her silence did not quiet the mob. It only made her more of a target. Colleagues whispered about her past relationships, her ambition, her hunger for spotlight, as though her entire history had been rewritten by a few photos on a yacht, and the unfairness of it all only deepened her isolation. What no one on the outside could see was the tension inside their walls. Late-night arguments, quiet accusations unanswered, questions sometimes ending in silence, sometimes in storm, but always with the knowledge that the world was waiting for their end and feeding off the spectacle. Bezos knew the cost was greater than emotional. It was financial, political, existential. For a man who had poured billions into space, who had courted leaders who had built an image of precision control, the appearance of betrayal weakened not just his marriage, but his standing in a world where perception was power. And so he made the only choice he knew how. He chose patience, silence, calculation, building piece by piece. The narrative he would later unleash, one designed not just to protect him, but to punish whoever thought they could control the story of Jeff Bezos. Because in his world, betrayal was not forgiven, it was answered.
This video covers legal allegations in a news context. All claims are from official filings, and no guilt is implied until proven in court. Please keep all discussions respectful. Allegations are not facts until proven in court.